He had not planned to come home that afternoon. In fact, the idea had struck him only minutes before his car turned onto the long, familiar driveway, an impulse born out of exhaustion rather than sentiment. Adrian Blackwood, a self-made millionaire whose name commanded boardrooms and headlines alike, had spent the last 3 months moving between cities, meetings, and negotiations that blurred into one another. His mansion, once the symbol of everything he had built, had slowly become just another address. He told himself he was coming home for paperwork, for rest, for silence. Yet as the car rolled to a stop and he dismissed the driver, a strange heaviness settled in his chest, the kind he usually ignored. The house was quiet, too quiet for a family lunch hour, and Adrian frowned slightly as he stepped inside without announcing himself. He loosened his tie, moved past the marble hallway, and followed the faint clink of cutlery toward the dining room. What he expected was routine, his children seated properly, his staff moving efficiently, everything controlled and orderly, the way his life had been designed. What he saw instead made him stop so suddenly that even his breath seemed to forget how to move. At the dining table sat his 3 daughters, identical in their pale dresses, heads bowed, hands folded, eyes closed, not laughing, not restless, but deeply still. And beside them stood the new nanny, the quiet woman he had barely noticed during hurried introductions weeks earlier, serving plates not with mechanical precision but with a tenderness that felt almost sacred. The girls were praying. Not reciting words they had been forced to memorize, but praying with a sincerity Adrian had not seen in years. For a moment, time collapsed inward. He remembered another dining table, far smaller and far poorer, where his own mother used to pause before meals, insisting on gratitude even when there was barely enough food to go around. He remembered rolling his eyes as a boy, promising himself that when he grew rich, he would never bow his head for anything or anyone. And yet here, in the house that had cost him everything, his marriage, his peace, his presence, his children were doing exactly that, led not by him, not by tutors or tradition, but by a woman whose name he had to consciously recall. Adrian remained frozen, unnoticed, as the prayer ended and the girls opened their eyes with calm smiles, thanking the nanny softly as if she were family rather than staff. Something tightened in his throat. He noticed details he had never cared about before, how the nanny knelt slightly to be at eye level, how she waited until all 3 girls were served before stepping back, how the room felt warmer than usual despite the unchanged decor. 1,000 questions rushed through his mind, none of them about profit margins or schedules. When had his daughters learned to pray? Why did they look more peaceful now than he had ever seen them? And why did it hurt so much to realize that he had not been the one to give them that peace? The nanny finally noticed him, her eyes widening just a fraction before she lowered her gaze respectfully, but Adrian barely registered it. He was looking at his daughters, at the way they began to eat quietly, content, whole. In that stillness, a truth he had spent years outrunning finally caught him. He had given them everything except himself. The millions, the mansion, the security, they meant nothing in comparison to this moment of connection he had almost missed. He cleared his throat, the sound startling everyone, and the girls looked up, surprise turning quickly into smiles as they saw him standing there. "Papa," one of them exclaimed, joy unfiltered, and just like that, the invisible wall between him and the table shattered. He sat down slowly, awkwardly, unsure of his place in a scene that had existed without him, and for the first time in decades, Adrian Blackwood felt small, not in power, but in humility. He asked about the prayer, about their day, about the nanny's name, listening more than speaking, learning what his absence had taught them and what his presence could still heal. The lunch stretched longer than any meeting ever had, and when he finally stood to leave, something had shifted irrevocably. He was still a millionaire, still driven, still ambitious, but no longer blind. As he walked away, he glanced back once more at the table, imprinting the image into his memory, silently promising himself that unannounced arrivals would become a habit, not an exception. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that the most powerful moments in life are often the quiet ones we almost miss, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this aren't just meant to be watched, they're meant to be felt, remembered, and shared.